So my name is Sarah Jemison. I was asked to moderate this panel today discussing the shortage of affordable housing and what its impact is in Memphis. So we've got two experts, one kind of looking at the national picture, Kyle Arbuckle, who's from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which has a special place in my heart because I used to work there. And then Cornelia Saunders from Promise Development Corporation, who's doing this work in Memphis. So we get to look at the national picture and its impact in Memphis. So I'm going to start just by asking you all to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit of your story, and why you choose to work in this field.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon.
They say it's working, but just...
Hang on. Keep talking. Cornelia Sanders, Promise Development Corporation.
Check, check, check.
Yep. We're good? All right, let's try this again. Good afternoon. So I'm Cornelia Sanders, Promise Development Corporation, which started out as North Memphis CDC in 2000, and the community grew, our vision grew, so then we changed the name. But we started working in that community with Hope Presbyterian Church, which is a parachurch organization outside the community in Cordova. They saw the needs in our community changing beyond just doing church and wanted to get involved more in the day-to-day and not just come in and do vacation Bible study, give things away. So we formed an organization called Oasis of Hope, and I moved over to North Memphis CDC, and then after that, the area grew, we grew our vision again, and it became Promise Development Corporation. So the three things we do is housing, economic development, and social services.
Thanks. My name is Kyle Arbuckle. I work at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. In my presentation, I'll explain what the National Low-Income Housing Coalition is, but you asked why I got into housing. I live in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C., and recently a report came out through the Washington Post that D.C. is one of the most rapidly gentrifying cities in the country. And I got involved doing some volunteering with an anti-displacement organization and also working and volunteering at a women's homeless shelter. And so I wanted to make that career more professional, so that's why I joined the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And I was going to jump into my presentation.
Fantastic.
Okay, so the National Low-Income Housing Coalition is a national nonpartisan policy advocacy and research nonprofit founded in 1974 and is focused on ensuring that people with the lowest incomes have access to decent, affordable housing. So I want to go over some key terms before we get into some of the data, just so everyone's clear. So when we say affordable, we use the HUD definition of affordable that your housing utility costs do not exceed 30% of your gross household income. And if your cost burden, that means your housing costs exceed 30% of your gross household income, i.e. not affordable. And then severely cost burden means that your housing costs exceed 50% of your household income. So area median income, AMI, is calculated by HUD for each geography, and it's used to determine eligibility for federal housing programs. Fair market rent, also calculated by HUD for each geography, and it estimates the rental cost of a modest apartment and adjusts for the number of bedrooms. So this is a pretty important chart for us. So this is the level of income levels, and we focus on ELI, extremely low income, as they face the greatest shortage and the greatest need for affordable and available housing. And then I included some statistics for the AMIs for Memphis, as you can see here. So what is the crisis? We found that the U.S. has a shortage of more than 7 million rental homes affordable and available to extremely low-income renter households. So to paint this picture more clear, as you see on the left, there are 11 million extremely low-income renter households. There are only 7.4 million affordable and available units to those 11 million households. Unfortunately, as you go up each income bracket dips into the affordable units for income brackets below them. This means that there are only 4 million affordable and available units to extremely low-income renters. So to put it even more in context, we do this calculation for every 100 extremely low-income renter households, and there are only 37 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 renter households. This is a map of the different gap data across the country for each state. This data is all online, and you can get a hard copy as well if you'd like to come talk to me about it. I'm happy to share it with you. So here in Tennessee, there is a shortage of 126,745 rental homes affordable and available for ELI renters. Something else to note that I caught was that there are 65% of ELI renters are severely cost burdened. That number drops to 25% when you go to VLI, so further demonstrating how the greatest need and the greatest burden is on ELI renters. Something else to note on the left is a chart of the makeup of extremely low-income renters. 40% of them work, 29% are disabled, 19% are seniors. So I'd like to think that this dispels the notion that ELI renters don't work or whatever the pathology of people in poverty that there may be. They either are working or struggle to find work. So here's some congressional district data for District 9 here in Tennessee. Unfortunately, there are only 20 affordable and available units for every 100 ELI renters, and that number jumps to 51 when you go to very low income. So again, demonstrating that the greatest need and the greatest shortage is at the ELI level. And then at the bottom here, you can see some housing waste statistics. And I will transition into our other main research report, which is the Out of Reach report. This report discusses the wage needed for a modest fair market rent apartment in each state. So in Tennessee, you work $16.58 an hour to afford that type of apartment. You need to work 91 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a 2-bedroom rental home, and 75 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a 1-bedroom home. So I'm just going to quickly plug NLIHC in case anybody else is interested in learning more about us and joining our coalition. So this is our Advocates Guide. This is our Bible, essentially. It details the history and background of all federal housing programs, provides a lot of toolkits for advocates to how to do better advocacy, be more efficient with your advocacy. Yeah. And then one publication I didn't mention, which is a special one to me as I recently created it and published it, was Tenant Talk, which is done twice a year, and it focuses on issues facing low-income renters. So we did an issue on gentrification and displacement in the spring, and this past fall we did one on public housing and the history of it and the future of it as well. So like I said, if you join NLIHC, you'll have access to a lot of these different data profiles and different data publications. We are a donation-suggested membership organization, so I'd highly recommend you all join. We're really trying to expand our field in Tennessee. We don't have much connections here. That's why I was actually sent here. So I'd love to connect with anybody afterwards as well. That's it. And this is my contact info in case anybody wants to reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kyle. That 20 for every 100 ELI renters, extremely low-income renters, is really striking. Cornelius, I'd love to hear from you about how you've seen that play out in Memphis. Mike.
Gotcha. As you notice, the number of units that's needed in our community, as well as the average income or the income amount needed, is both of those are going in opposite direction. So if we are a community-based organization and you're building houses, none of us have the capacity to build at that rate. And then also the thing that happens is the demand is so great. So then you're able to streamline and cherry pick who goes into those particular units. So you still have these people that have less income that we're just now talking about going to $15 an hour. So if it's going to be $16 an hour just to afford something, then there's an issue there. So how do we do that? We have to work together as a community. One of the things we've always talked about is that if you control the land, then you can control the destiny. So part of it is that we got to buy up the land that's in the community that is for sale at a reasonable rate so that you can build some affordable housing for those that are not making $16 an hour.
That makes a lot of sense. Kyle, I know that in the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's research, you talk about the need for decent affordable housing. So can you flesh out for us what kind of decent means? And Cornelius, maybe you can talk about what that, or the lack of it, looks like in Memphis.
I think that's kind of an issue in and of itself. Is the definition is very broad. HUD defines it as anything that is dilapidated and missing basic utilities like a kitchen, plumbing, electricity, things like that. But often we see that a lot of HUD properties may only temporarily have an issue or have only one of those issues, and it doesn't necessarily meet the threshold of what HUD would define as unlivable, but when in reality it is. One of our newest board members at NLIHC, she is a HUD tenant in South Florida, and she found I don't even know how many. She said hundreds of maggots were in her kitchen, and she found out that a lot of her neighbors were also experiencing the same issue. And she went to HUD. I saw all the emails that she sent to HUD, and unfortunately, it didn't seem like they found that to be the threshold for what is dilapidated or what is unlivable. So I think coming up with a more clearly defined definition of what unlivable is would be more useful. But I'm sure Cornelius could probably speak more to what that looks like.
So what we're seeing in our communities is that we have older housing stock. And we talk about landlords being slumlords. There's a double-edged sword there. If you're only bringing in $250 a month on a particular property, how much of that could you put back into fixing that property up? So I do agree that there needs to be a better definition of what is decent in a sense, because you go to some places, in some communities, they would talk about, well, it's not leaking and you have lights and you have a floor, but is that okay? Then what is livable? What is not fit for human habitation? And when you're working with the homeless population, you see that a park bench is not a home. A car is not a home. So in that regard, there has to be a standard. And what we talk about in our community is the promised way. There's a certain standard that we have no matter what the amount of rent that you're collecting in there. Now, that could be a burden on an organization to try to do that, but with some subsidies, with some community help, with some other funding, some of these things can be addressed.
So you talked a little bit, can you break down more of what fills that gap between the maybe $250 that a resident is able to pay and rent and the cost to actually keep an apartment livable and really quality?
You have to have layered financing. So if we go in, and we try to do both and Crystal is working in one of the major communities that we're in, it's a both and. It's not you just go in and build all new, because if you do that, the community we in 38107 will become non-affordable to a certain population. So there's houses there that are older stock. But if you got a street or three streets where new houses are, and then you have a couple of streets where you went in and rehabbed a home, when you rehab, it's never going to compare to a new construction. So somebody is seeing that saying, well, that's where I want to live. I want to live in one of those homes. But if you're looking at it, the income that you're able to bring in on that is only $250,000 or $250. It's not equal. It can't equate. So you have to look at it for the amount of money that an individual can pay. You make that the best property that it can be.
And Kyle, what exists on the national level to sort of try to fill that gap? I mean, we talk about 1 in 4 residents who qualify for affordable housing receive that subsidy. But, we obviously need to focus on filling that gap and reaching the other 3 out of 4. But what exists for the 1 out of 4 that could be expanded?
One of NLIHC's big pet projects is the National Housing Trust Fund, which is a revenue-neutral housing program specifically for low-income renters. I know that Somebody told Memphis government this morning the housing trust here, 80% AMI, which I understand might be but surely ELI would just face the greatest needs. So maybe some more targeting towards ELI. Because at the same time, when you do that, you also lift up all the other AMI levels. So.
Makes a lot of sense. So jumping to kind of what this shortage looks like and its impacts, which I think is the title of our session, was how does this impact, say, the health or the education in individual families and in a community? Can you talk about that kind of on the national level or the local level? Both, whoever wants to take it.
Promise was a part of a demonstration that was across 5 sites across the country to look at in-depth how does housing affect other outcomes. So one of the things that we did was work with families that had DCS involvement. And what we found out is the whole housing first model. I'm sure everybody's heard of that. But it actually works, but it's housing first and not housing only. So what we find is that education levels, kids go to 4 different schools or whatever in a particular year when they don't have housing. There's some emergency room visit things that have happened. There's domestic violence that is taking place, unemployment that is happening, because if I'm sleeping in my car or doubled up when someone's home, it's hard for me to think about those other things. So you focused on housing, where we're going to sleep tonight. The other thing that will happen would be food. So if I'm doubled up living with someone and then we have one refrigerator and we're saying that, well, you can't eat my child's food in a sense, or you can't cook. So what am I going to do? I'm going to purchase fast food. And that's going to eat away at any disposable income that you possibly have. So across the board, all type of things are happening. Domestic violence, the number of schools that you attend, the emergency room visit, the issue that you have with the weather and asthma and all of that. So to have someone in a safe, decent, affordable, warm place will reduce that significantly.
Much I could add to that, but we see that children's outcomes when they live in stable housing are exponentially better compared to when they're moving around a lot as a child. I saw this study in New York. The lowest mobility rate for children in certain types of housing was subsidized in public housing, and it was around 30%. Market rate housing was 50%, and they also fleshed that out to show that those children had worse outcomes in terms of academics and other issues. Something else I think about what this means is, we talk a lot about the climate crisis, and if we're not building densely, we're forcing people to live further out and drive in further. So coupled with worse transportation, worse infrastructure, we're only exacerbating the climate crisis.
Yeah, certainly affordable housing that's far away from transit lines is definitely a problem in Memphis. Cornelius, could you tell us more about that pilot program and what results you all saw or kind of what's happening there?
Well, I must say this. We were naive to think that once we produce some great outcomes that DCS as far as, HUD will change everything around and say, okay, this works, so we're going to pump more money.
HUD didn't move quickly.
HUD didn't move,
Really?
so it was like, okay, we have all this data about, so now what do you do with that? So there's this Arizona self-sufficiency matrix that we're looking at, and things that are determining whether a person learns at whatever rate, and the number of hospital visits, the number of schools that they're attending, and then also the resources that are in a community. So all of those things are affected about whether you have affordable housing or quality housing. Now, one thing that did happen, we were on one of the only sites, there was 5 sites I said, Florida, San Francisco, Cedar Rapids, and one other, but in Connecticut, the entire state of Connecticut. So you were looking at certain demographics and how would they be able to move, how would housing first affect that? And we were looking more in an urban area that was less educated, that had younger parents with multiple families, and then we were what we considered a campus site and not a scattered site. So the campus site created some additional issues that we didn't necessarily think about that it would in a scattered site. because everybody with the same type of mentality that had unemployment, they resolved conflict sort of in the same way. So what we did, we created another housing development. When we were trying to get away from public housing developments, we kind of created that because people were not having employment, kids were not going to school, there was experiencing violence, and we put them all together. So that was one thing that we learned, that we said maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. But the overarching goal was we were able to house people. They stayed in housing longer when you have permanent supportive housing. We were able to have some other agencies that come alongside that would work with domestic violence, that would do the mental health piece. And that's something that's critical in our area, in our community, that I don't really think we talk enough about, is mental illness. So we brought all these other services, wraparound services, to try to help. Daycare was an issue, that if I have 4 or 5 kids, only one attends school, then how am I going to go out and search for a job or being a part of a training program? And then after that, if there's no job on the other end, you give me a computer and a screen to say, okay, good luck, go look for a job. That doesn't really work. So we learned a lot. We accomplished a lot. We were able to keep families together. But at the end, when that demonstration ends and those dollars ends, and you got to figure out a way, how do I continue to keep these families housed? Or we're going to repeat this cycle that they have to move out of this community, move out to this unit, and then try to find housing on their own again.
And what resources do you, Kyle, you want to respond to that? Or I had a follow-up question because I was curious. As how this was funded. You talked about kind of the funding drying up, but what are the pieces that are at play? Was it federal dollars? Was it local dollars? I assume it was some sort of combination.
Right. So we had federal dollars, and then we had local dollars from DCS, and then we had some dollars from Community Alliance for the Homeless, in the sense. So that was that layer of financing in there. The federal dollars went away, but you got 73 units with 73 families in there that you can't walk in and say the demonstration is over, housing is over, this project is over. You can't do that. So I would encourage other organizations, community development organizations, nonprofit organizations, is that you got to have something that's going to bring you some dollars in. And if your passion is housing, you figure out how to make that work. So on the affordable housing side, we do have units that we charge market rate rent. But what you do is you find yourself taking those dollars, and then you're self-funding this other program. Because it's the right thing to do, is to give people housing, period. So, but you're not getting those funds. So you're sitting there and you have this wrestle and you have this tug with, okay, I could be doing more in another community with these dollars, or buying up property, building more houses, or I could just continue to self-fund this program until we can figure out another way to do that. And you're thinking about getting people jobs, but 3 things happen. 1, you have to convince them that they need a job. 2, help them get a job. And then 3, convince them to stay on the job. So there's some follow-up that has to happen. And then if you're doing all of that, and if your housing is the best housing that they have, are they going to move from you, where they paying 30% of whatever that amount is, to another community where it's substandard housing? No, they're going to stay there with you where the services are. So it's an interesting wrestle that you have to wrestle with.
Certainly. Well, I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up. So be thinking about questions. And I think there might be a survey going around, so y'all can just be working on that as it comes to you. But one question I had for both of you, really, is what can Memphians, the people in this room and others, do to work to alleviate this problem and close this gap?
Well, like you said, I focus on the national level, but some things I noticed from today, they mentioned that the minimum wage increase happened here, but it was only for government employees, correct? I think I just showed how that you need $16.58 an hour to afford a modest apartment. So first of all, there needs to be higher wages. As I mentioned before with the Housing Trust Fund, I think that there needs to be more narrow targeting for something like that. Because if you're not subsidizing those ELI people, they have nowhere else to go. I think someone mentioned earlier that there are over 8,000 people on the voucher waiting list. And so if they're not getting vouchers and they're not getting Housing Trust Fund housing, they're not getting any housing. Something else I think that I thought about was interacting with the federal government here. I know Senator Lamar Alexander is on the Senate Appropriations Committee, which has jurisdiction over HUD's budget. I don't know his politics, or I don't know the relationship with groups here and him, but I'm going to assume not great. But I think if you can turn him from a no to a I don't care, that could be something productive. So yeah, those are just a couple things that I thought.
Yeah, certainly. As he's sitting kind of on the money going to things like permanent supportive housing and vouchers, and the number of vouchers that are available every year. That's a huge thing, and the investment in public housing, things like that, certainly.
A couple of things that we've talked about in our community is collaborations. Collaborations is a good word until you get people in a room and start working together. So we had 10 agencies, working together on this demonstration. And when things get hard and when people don't make their mental health appointments, then you have to get them off the roll. But you still have people that have mental health issues. So you got to find people that are passionate and committed regardless of what the criteria says. So if it says that after 3 times you don't make your appointment, we're going to take you off the roll. That may be a person that takes 4 or 5 times. So you have to stay in there with them and whatever it takes. And also those of us that are working in communities that the median income may be $19,000. We have to figure out a way to build capacity, and if they're spending millions of dollars in other communities, why can't I build some of those houses in those other communities, be able to make some money, and then give back into my community because I can't always go to THDA and HUD in the city of Memphis. They only have so many dollars, and then we're all competing for those dollars. But we can do some development in other areas. We're adjacent to St. Jude. They have doctors, nurses, groundsmen, scientists, and all. They live somewhere. So where are they living? Can we go in and build up those communities, make money off of that, and say that we will invest in our community? So that way we're not draining the other resources because we're working in an underserved community. That's just one thing we think about. What are the things that we can do to bring other investors into the community, back to that collaboration? So if the fact that if I can only have capacity to build 10 houses, somebody else may have the capacity and the wherewithal to build 100, then we all have to get together and make that happen and not be so territorial in the fact that, no, I'm the only one that could do this, and I'm the only one that could do that right. I'm not the only one. But you have to care about the people that you're serving. So it's just some things we've thought about or talked about.
Yeah, in order to be able to serve a whole community, we have to learn to collaborate, and that might mean sacrifice on everybody's part to get to a center point. So I'd love to open it up to questions if folks have any. Well, you're the closest one, so here you go.
I just had yes, Aaron Robinson. Hey, everyone. Question for you. $16 an hour, if you multiply that times 12 months a year, working 40 hours, it's only about $30,000 a year. And when you take out taxes, you're looking at maybe 28, 27. That's no money to qualify for a decent car or even a house. So the minimum wage is going to have to go from $15 an hour really to like $27 to $30 an hour for you to actually qualify for something that's quality made. So is there any particular effort that's going on around the country to even go beyond $15 an hour for those who are at minimum wage?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. That's a very good point, though, because, like you said, even if you can't afford your rent, that doesn't mean you can afford a car, food, childcare, things like that. So I think Cornelius made the point that it takes collaboration of different types of groups. Something that NLIHC has is the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign. It's a multi-sector coalition, so Children's Health Watch, the National Education Association, groups like that focus on child welfare, formed a coalition to lobby Congress for more affordable housing funding, demonstrating how it's not just about housing, it's also about welfare, like you're talking about, being able to afford other things. So, yeah.
I think we're be kidding ourselves to think that we're going to get people to make $20 an hour. One, if we don't have the skill set to do that, what does that do for someone that is making $20 an hour now that have a certain skill set? Are we going to bump them up to $40 an hour? So I think we have to get creative in our communities in the sense. We know that transportation here in Memphis, right. So if we have mechanics in our neighborhoods, then we do have them, we can't think that they will go off and get certified. So organizations like myself and others, why wouldn't we, during tax season or prior to tax season, buy cars and then have the mechanics that will be able to work on those cars in those communities so people can get to work. And then we own businesses or shops or whatever in the community for whatever services that we need, that we can reduce the cost of some of the things. So if a person making $16 an hour is only $30,000 a year, then how can I have the same services in a sense, or my needs being met but at a reduced cost, so that I could participate in my own coming out of this poverty thing in a sense. And that could go from home repairs to car repairs to groceries to whatever those things are, that we just get creative in our communities and make sure that we have those services there at a reduced cost. Reduced cost does not mean that it's reduced quality. So we got to have the same quality, but just give it to them at a reduced cost. And I think everybody wants to participate in their own, turning their own situation around. Nobody wants a handout in a sense.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Okay. Oh, I'm Betty Teasley. I'm with the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. And I was wondering, when you look at Memphis vacancy rates, they're really high. And I wonder, both from a local level as well as from a national level, so there's lots of different reasons why that vacancy rate is as high as it is in Memphis. But I'm wondering if there are strategies that could be employed, because that's both a asset as well as a drag on sort of the housing stock and the housing quality. But I'm wondering if what could be done to make that an asset, particularly for extremely low income households.
Well, unofficially, we kind of put together a group of business owners, investors, residents, people from other communities in a sense, and we call it the North of Chelsea PUD group, Planned Urban Development. And how can we buy vacant lots? How can we increase our businesses? All of those things. What are the purposes for those lots? What would be the best purposes? Some people talk about community gardens in a sense, but if you have a lot that's only 30 by 40, putting a community garden there, how many people are you going to really feed? So it may not be the best use for that lot. Look at lot usage as well. But back to that whole collaboration thing. What assets do you have in the community? Who do you have that has the right heart, the right mind, the right mindset that will come alongside of you and work in these communities to take up some of these dilapidated vacant homes? And also the land bank has to work with you in the sense of working with, if you got a homeowner next door, which they're starting to do, or if you've been maintaining a lot, they're looking to give those lots to individuals. But how do we get the information out? How do we make the information available? And then we have other people that are absentee landlords, or parents have died. Somehow they end up with this property. They're looking for a way to get rid of it, but don't know how. So how do we get that information out to know that what could be done, and how can you turn this into an asset is one thing I think we should do a better job at.
I think one thing I'd say is that you should incentivize landlords and property managers to not allow vacancies in their buildings. So whether that be compelling them through taxes or different types of penalties to fill those apartments, because even though a high vacancy rate might mean that there are more available apartments, that doesn't mean they're affordable to everyone. So I think, I think everything Cornelia said too would apply.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions? Here we go.
Name is Babakar. Again, I don't know if that's a question or participation, but what I see really the problem where it lays down is the simple fact that if you look at other states, the economy are doing very well, most of them. And why not Memphis? So that's a question that could be answered. And what I see is Memphis is still a labor economy, kind of. People are more driven to work and thinking that this is what makes it and not. When you look at other states, they are more kind of knowledge economy. And the difference there between those two is nothing else than education. It's nothing else than education. We could sit here and meet today and meet after tomorrow. The problem is still there. I was asking a question earlier about the Bronx and Brooklyn and Harlem, what I see on housing in the 80s. And recently when I went there, seriously, I have an apartment. I was paying about $560 or $570. When I asked, they told me it's like 2007 in Harlem. And what changes there if you go will be investment. People invested. In Memphis, for instance, I went to FedEx to look at the job criteria there. There was 1,000 job openings, almost 985 jobs open. And they can't find anybody to fill those jobs. So that's the problem. So let's, again, see how we're going to educate our children and our neighbors, especially on those vacant lands. Sometimes the main problem is they don't have access to capital. You know, earlier they talk about redlining. Indeed, there's redlining, but still there's way to go across that. There's some CDFI, like I was saying earlier here. Let's try to go to those CDFI and try to get funded to buy those lots and do something about it. But sometimes money is there. JP Morgan just put money out there for Memphis in the White area, in Whitehaven and Fraser. But you don't see anybody coming to request to get a loan or get some type of commercial loans or business loans. So out there, that's what I wanted to just say.
I think certainly housing can be a barometer for the larger economic health of a community. And so if, you know, when we have a housing crisis, it's both the supply side and the demand side, and kind of figuring out how we improve so many things that impact someone's inability to pay for housing. Definitely makes a lot of sense.
Talking to the guys in Fraser and talking to people in South City and also talking to for-profit investors as what are you doing that we could be doing that we hadn't thought about, and also putting pressure on banks and other lenders. And we got to be wise and good stewards that when someone take a chance on us, we got to be able to repay that money and produce what we said we're going to do. And I would challenge any of you guys to look at us as a not-for-profit organization and look at our structure and our financials and all of that. And you could probably look at some for-profit financials that can't compare to some of the ones that we have in our community. So we're not less than. We have very smart, committed people that are serving in these communities, and we're doing great work, and we just need to get that out to more people.
Hi, my name is Janice. My concern is, let me first of all say it's been a very informative session here today. The problem that I have and what I tried to voice earlier when I spoke out and what the guy from this afternoon platform spoke of is that redlining often is a practice of city governments. And that's the issue that I feel happens to a lot of inner city black communities that doesn't have the support of, some CDC to speak for them. When you have the housing crisis, not just in the U.S., but just focused right here in Memphis, Paul Young stated earlier, you have 8,000 people that uses housing vouchers, and then you have another 8,000 on a wait list. And my emphasis I can't express enough is in our community of North Memphis and the Hollywood High Park area, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water came and bought almost 200 residential properties that they're going to convert to an industrial park. That is such a waste. That is such a mismanagement. That property could be reused to rebuild homes. And I can't get Paul Young to see that it's not a done deal. He wants to say that it's a done deal because the land has been bought and the houses were torn down. No, what you need to do is give that land back over to a community bank and rebuild houses on that line, and it'll be suitable for these low-income people that you say you can't find housing for. And then secondly, this thing about, there was the workshop I attended earlier this afternoon, the lady from the Works. She spoke about how they were providing home loans for people who have difficulties affording. And she talked about how they're able to, because she gets the money for basically 0%, she could put a loan for like, and the payments are roughly under $400 for PITI, which is great and good. But with the problem that I have, when it comes to helping poor people, we're always expected to pay our fair share, pay something. But when it comes to higher end, those people are not held to the same accountable. The rich millionaires, the Lehman Brothers, the bankers, they walk away and get relieved of billions in debt. But then you expect a poor person to share in an interest rate on a loan. And I read in the paper last week or this week where the Tennessee Housing is sitting on some $732 million. $732 million that's designed to help poor families in need. And then you're saying you can't find money to buy homes, fix up homes, and give them homes, but yet this money is just sitting there and not being put to use. And the point that I was trying to make when I was trying to say to the lady earlier, well, maybe that 4% should be an encouragement instead of, while you make it pay it in their principal note, that interest rate goes to a savings for those people. If you stay in this house 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then you'll get your interest payment back and you'll be able to build a savings so that when you have that personal crisis,